this is number 2. And we have the point A, which is negative 3, 6. Let's start out by plotting that, negative 3, 6. And then B is 2, 6. C is 4, 0. A at negative 3, 6. B at 2, 6. C at 4, 0. Connects to make a triangle. Plotting those 3 points. So we've been doing transformations. So far we have 2 kinds of transformations. What are they? Yeah, Taylor. Translation and reflection. So translation is when you just shift something down or up, and reflection is when you take a figure and reflect it across a line. Okay, so 2 kinds of transformations so far. And what we're going to do on this one is, well, actually, it's already been reflected. So this is a reflection. And the image point for A is at negative 7, negative 2. So there's the pre-image for A, and it's getting reflected down to there at negative 7, negative 2. And then the image point for B is negative 4, negative 6. And then the image point for C is 2, negative 4. Okay, so this is a line, this is a reflection. So what happened is this got reflected down to here. And our job is to figure out where the line is that it was reflected across. So the directions here say, well, find the line of reflection. That's the title of the worksheet. So our job is to find the line of reflection. We know it's been reflected, and we got to find the line. Okay, so we've been drawing connector lines. And I could draw from B to B prime, but then it'll get too messy. So I'm just going to draw 2 connector lines. And what do we know about connector lines and the reflection line? All right, so yeah, if you're not sure, you can do some research. Nice work, Charlie. So the question on the table is, what do we know about connector lines and reflection lines? Yeah.
They're perpendicular and with line of reflection instead of midpoints and just perpendicular to the connector line.
Okay, so there's two key facts there. Number one, it's perpendicular. So the reflection line has to make a 90-degree angle with the connector line. And then the other fact is that it's in the middle, which makes sense because if you reflect, it's going to end up in the middle. So it's going to be through the midpoints and perpendicular. Okay, so if I want to find the line of reflection, I need to find the midpoint. First of all, so that'll help me. Okay, so that's eyeballing the midpoint, but let's actually calculate the midpoint between A and A prime. So the way you do that is you add the x's, so -7 plus -3, and then divide by 2, and -2 plus 6 divided by 2. So I'm figuring out the midpoint because we know that the reflection line is going to go through the middle of the connector line. So I'm finding the middle between A and A prime. Bless you. Okay, so -7 plus -3 is -10, and then -10 divided by 2 is -5. So I just added and then divided by 2. Same thing here. -2 plus 6 is 4, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that means this point in the middle is 1, 2, -5, and 2. Does that seem accurate on your graph? That -5, 2 is in the middle? Okay, so we found the midpoint. And the reason we found the midpoint is because the reflection line is going to go through the middle of the connector line. Okay, then the other thing we know about the reflection line is it's going to be perpendicular. So we're going to find the slope from A to A prime. So we can figure out what the slant of this line should be. Okay, so the slope from A to A prime is -2 minus 6 and -7 minus -3. So let's contrast these formulas so it can help you. With midpoint, you add. So we did -7 plus -3. With slope, you subtract. So it's -7 minus -3. So midpoint is adding, slope is subtracting. And with midpoint, you start with the x's. And with slope, you start with the y's. That's why the x's are on the bottom. Okay, so what we're finding right here is the slant of the connector line. So -2 minus 6 is -8, and -7 minus -3 is -4. And then -8 divided by -4 is 2. So that means that the slope of this line is 2. So that's up 2 over 1. You can see that that happens on your graph. Up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. That's the slant of the line. Okay, so this is the slant of the connector line. So how am I going to get the slope for the reflection line? I'm trying to find the reflection line. So I need the slope of that. And I know that it's perpendicular. So what do we know about perpendicular lines and how their slopes compare? Like if this is the original slope, what's the perpendicular slope going to be? Yeah.
Opposite reciprocal.
Opposite reciprocal, good. So it's the flipped opposite. So you take 2, which is the same as 2 over 1, and you flip it, and that's 1/2. And then the opposite of that would be negative 1/2. So the flipped opposite of 2 is negative 1/2. So that's the perpendicular slope. And the reason I care about the perpendicular slope is I know that this reflection line is perpendicular to this connector line. So now I know that this reflection line has slope negative 1/2. So now from your point negative 5, 2, go down 1 and over 2. And then you can connect and graph the reflection line. So our job was to find the reflection line, and we're pretty close to finding it now. We've got this, at least we have it drawn in on our paper. Okay, so now we have to write the equation of this line. And whenever you write the equation of a line, you start out with the template y equals mx plus b. So this is the equation of all lines. It's how you start out. For a particular line, we've got to figure out what the m is, and we have to figure out what the b is. And we're looking for the reflection line. So what is the m for this reflection line? Yeah. Negative 1/2, right? Because that's the slope. Okay, so for the line we're looking for, we're going to put negative 1/2 in for m. Now our final thing we have to figure out is what this b is. And the way you figure out the b is you use the point that you know. And we've got, it's kind of muddled now because I drew over it. We've got the point negative 5, 2 that's on the line. Negative 5 is x, and 2 is y. So I can plug in negative 5 for x and 2 for y over there. So recopy the half, put a negative 5 in for x. Recopy the equals, put a 2 in for the y. So all I did was replace the x with negative 5 and the y with 2. So now I can figure that out. Negative 1/2 times negative 5 is 2.5. And then you subtract 2.5 on both sides. Minus 2.5 is negative 0.5. So now I know the equation of the line is y equals negative 1/2 x, because that negative 1/2 was my slope, plus negative 0.5 for my b. So this is the final answer here. The question said find the equation for the reflection line. So this is the equation for that line. And we can go over here and verify. Does it look like for that line the y-intercept is negative 1/2? Yeah, it does right here. Looks like it's hitting the y-axis at negative 1/2. So it's gelling with what the picture looks like. Okay, so for now, it was good to graph because we had a picture to look at. But for other problems, we're not going to graph them. So let's go on to number 5. And here, the original point is negative 2, 7. and the image point is negative 7, 2. So, and the directions still say find the line of reflection. So we're still doing the same thing. We're still finding the line that these are reflected across. But this time we're not going to graph. Now it kind of helps to have a picture though, so I'll put a picture up here just for reference. But it might not be accurate. So let's say G is here and G prime is here. Again, this might be totally inaccurate, but it'll help reference what we're doing. Yeah. You sure?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so here's G. I don't think I graphed that right at all. You don't need to graph it at all. Here's G prime. I don't think that's right either, but I'm just trying to reference. Okay, so what we're looking for is, here's the connector line, but we're looking for the reflection line. And what do we know about reflection lines? There's two pieces of information we know about reflection lines. The first one, it goes through the midpoint of the connector line. And the second one is it's perpendicular. So those are the two key facts that we need. The fact that it goes through the middle, so we're going to use the midpoint formula, and the fact that it's perpendicular, so we're going to use the slope formula. All right, so first job is to find the midpoint between G and G prime. So that is negative 7 plus negative 2 divided by 2, and 2 plus 7 divided by 2. So this bit of work is to find the midpoint. And then over here, I'm going to do slope. That one's 2 minus 7. So just again to talk about the formulas. With midpoint, you add. And the y's come second. See, the y's are positive 2 and positive 7. So I added them, and I did that second. But with slope, I'm subtracting, and the y's are first. So that's hard for people to remember. Addition, subtraction, y is second, y is first. All right, so I got 2 minus 7, and then negative 7 minus negative 2 goes on the bottom. Two minus 7 is negative 5. Negative 7 minus negative 2 is negative 5 as well. So that divides out to be 1. So that tells me that the slant of this line, the slant of the connector line, is 1. Okay, then for the midpoint, I'll go ahead and add these. Negative 7 plus negative 2 is negative 9. Divided by 2 is negative 4.5. And then 7 plus 2 is 9. Divided by 2 is positive 4.5. So that tells me that the midpoint of the connector line, that's this point right here, is negative 4.5, 4.5. Okay, now am I trying to find the connector line, or am I trying to find the reflector line? Reflection line, right? Okay, so this is the slope of the connector line. So I need to figure out the slope of the reflection line. And that's going to be perpendicular to this one. So I have to do the flipped opposite. For 1, it's pretty uninteresting to flip it. 1 just flips over to 1. And then the opposite is negative 1. over here it was 2, and that flipped to a half. And then it was negative a half. Okay, so here I've got everything I need to figure out the answer. I've got a point that the reflection line goes through, and I've got the slope of the reflection line. So now I'm going to turn to y equals mx plus b. And the slope is -1 for the line I'm trying to find. This is an equation that works for every single line. We're trying to find a particular line, and we're halfway there because we have the slope up. And then we just need to work to find the y-intercept. So I'm going to put -4.5 for x and +4.5 for y. So there's +4.5 plugged in for y, and here's -4.5 plugged in for x. Okay, then -1 times -4.5 is +4.5. Then I'm going to recopy that plus, recopy that b, recopy that 4.5, recopy that equal sign. And then subtract 4.5 over. So b turns out to be 0. So final answer is y equals -1x plus 0. Is everybody doing okay? The two key facts are midpoint, the connector line, and the reflection line go through the midpoint and is perpendicular. Okay, you go back, I'll pass out the paper, and you go back and look at number 1. And then I've got something to pass out to you, and then I have one more problem to go over. Just give me a second to get things organized here. And while I'm passing stuff out, you can work on number 1. Actually, you can. We're going to skip number 1. You don't have to do that one. We can go on to number 3. We've got some stuff to pass out though. I'll have some more stuff to say. So work on number 3. Skip number 1. We did 2 and 5. Come on, you can do it. Christmas and geometry class today. Get a box of stuff.
Look, it's so cool.
Yeah, I knew you'd be excited. Okay, I'll talk about the present in a minute, but if you could flip to the back of this paper, please, where it says protractors. I would like to look at number 2 with you. And it asks for the measure of angle CRF on number 2. So look above at the picture. Do you see C and R and F? Okay, so that's an angle. And the tricky part is C is pointing at 2 different things. First of all, it's between 50 and 60, right? Is it closer to 60 or closer to 50? Closer to 60. So that's about 58. So let's write that down. Okay, then it's also between 120 and 130, right? Is it closer to 120 or is it closer to 130? It's closer to 120, right? So that's 122. Okay, so here's the problem with protractors. They give you 2 answers. You see how this one is giving 58 and 122? So we have to decide which one's the right answer. So if you look at C to R to F, is that an acute angle or is that an obtuse angle? It's an obtuse angle. So which one's the right answer? 58 or 122? 122, because that's bigger than 90. Okay, so what we're measuring with this protractor is we're measuring how much rotation there is. That's what an angle is, right? It's how much rotation there is. And we just measured that the rotation from here to here is 122. But the tool that you use to measure angles, called a protractor, it gives you 2 different answers. So you have to pick the right one. But that's not too bad because you can tell whether it's an obtuse angle or an acute angle. Okay, so there's like 3 at the bottom where you have to measure with your own protractor. So that's why I passed out the tools today. In your box of tools is a protractor. There's also some other stuff in there that we're gonna use one of them tomorrow. So make sure you bring these tools with you each day. But today you're using the protractor, and then on Tuesday we're going to use something else.
Wait, so we're keeping these?
Yeah, I wasn't kidding. This is Christmas. Like, you get to keep those. I know it's beyond your comprehension that you get to keep them.